gotta say that I think that was best, folks. I think that was probably one of the best discussions on tax we've ever had here.
Liberaven.
Hey, what's going on, Liberaven?
Not much. Yeah, just enjoying the stream. It's good.
Right on. Well, it's good to have you here. I'm glad you're enjoying it. What's on your mind tonight?
So I was wondering what your views were on inheritance tax.
Oh, well, I don't think it should be like 100% or anything. I know there's some people who think inheritances are wrong or moral or something. I don't know. It's not my favorite form of taxation, but I mean, if somebody could make a proposal about
Well,
it, I'd be open to it. I just where I'd start is there are some people who say inheritance is unjust or moral or whatever. I feel like ultimately it's a fundamental human drive to want to improve the lives of your children or relatives, want to give them the best chance they can have in life, and so I don't want to restrict people's ability to do that completely. But I know it's a charged issue. So what do you think about it?
yeah. So I put it to you in sort of similar terms to something that the Georges guy earlier brought up
Okay.
in the sort of earned versus unearned income.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, a lot of taxes, if you're trying to be sort of fiscally conservative,
Mm-hmm.
are a sort of trade-off, aren't they? And if you've got two taxes, for example, income tax and inheritance tax, I would look at which one is more just to tax more, and which one should we reduce. And I would make the argument that inheritance tax should be put up to as max as realistically possible in order to then reduce income tax in order to sort of, if we were to keep the overall income the same,
Mm-hmm.
that'd be the better thing to do. The reason being is that inheritance tax would be on something that is not earned. So the person receiving the inheritance tax, they haven't done the labor to earn that themselves. And therefore, it is more just to tax that than something like income tax, where they are doing it themselves, they are earning that wealth, and they should have as much of that as possible.
So the thing that gets me about that is that I get what you're saying about it being unearned for the person who gets it, but for the person who gives it, I mean, it's certainly earned for them. And if their aspiration is to spend their earned income at the moment of their death by giving it to somebody, I don't. I mean, I feel like you're not really getting around that issue because you're just. I mean, I guess it depends on how you look at it. Like if you view it as if you don't really consider the interest of the person who makes the bequest, then I guess it's easy to think of it as unearned income. But ultimately, it was certainly earned income for, well, almost likely it was earned income for the person who's passing it on.
Yeah.
And for that, I mean, for that sake, I don't want to punish them for wanting to give it on to somebody at the moment of their death.
Yeah, I would sort of. I mean, it sounds a bit callous, but they're dead, and the point would be that I would want to look after the interests of the person whilst they're alive and say, whilst you're alive, it is absolutely fair that you spend it as
Sure.
you wish. However, when the wealth is being passed to someone else, the considerations shouldn't be on the person who was handing over the money or the estate, but rather the person who's receiving it, and that's generally how we tax things.
Well,
Like income tax, it's a tax on the on like the wage given to the worker that is then being taxed. So I think the focus should be on the person receiving that wealth, which I would say is unearned, and therefore we should be looking at income tax versus inheritance tax. I would say lower income tax as much as possible, raise income tax as much as possible. I think that's more just.
aren't you basically, though, when you make a bequest, I mean, you're spending it at that point in time. I mean, the money is still in your account, but you've said, okay, my instructions are, I'm alive right now. My instructions are that moment of my death, money goes, to wherever I want it to go. Like, I don't see how this is like
Yeah.
a live versus dead issue. The only difference is that you're saying my expenditure kicks in at the moment of my death. So I don't see how their being dead really changes things, because it's still it's a request they made while they were alive. They just set it up to trigger when they were dead, so that for example, if if something happens, you still have the money in your account, and you can change your mind or whatever. while you're still alive. It seems like ultimately what you're saying is you want to limit the freedom of people to make decisions while they're alive.
Right. So let me put it to you this way. So in the case of income tax, we are taxing a wage that an employer chooses to give to a worker. And so it's sort of the same thing. The employer is making that free choice, and they are giving over the wealth to the worker. However, the government will then take a cut of that as income tax. And I would say that there's something that is inherently unjust about that, even though it's something that we should probably do anyway, because it's good for government to have revenue. But it's kind of the same situation with inheritance, in that the person is choosing to give the money like an employer would give to a worker. However, it is not something that the worker has earned through their own labor. And just on that sort of slight little fact there, where it's just slightly different, I would say that it's therefore both aren't very just, but inheritance tax is more just than income tax.
Okay, or at least
and
less
therefore
unjust.
we should try to balance the scales more in having more inheritance tax and less income tax.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting way to look at it. I see what you're saying by making that comparison, that ultimately neither of them is inherently just. They have their problems, but one is a voluntary trade of resources in exchange for labor, and the other one is just a voluntary trade, but nothing, but the party receiving it has not earned it. So you're saying that to tax earned income is more unjust than to tax unearned income, because in both cases you're respecting the wish of the person making the gift or giving the wage, but in the first case you're basically doing a harm to somebody who earned it, and in the second case you're doing a harm to somebody who didn't earn it, and so that's less of a harm. So yeah, I'm curious what people think of that. It's quite interesting, and I don't know, I'd have to think about it some more. So would you theoretically be open to like raising it to 100%?
I mean, in theory, yeah. I mean, as practically possible, really, because obviously with things like inheritance tax, the more you raise it, there are more incentives to dodge it by spending it beforehand, putting it in funds and things like that.
Yeah.
And like, I would want the government to do as much as they could to close those loopholes in an ethical way.
Yeah.
But theoretically, I think the max we could realistically do in order to then lower income tax would be the most just way of doing it.
So let me ask you: have you ever seen somebody put like numbers to paper about like, well, this would be the best amount of income tax and estate tax?
No.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see what that is, because I mean, I know there are people in chat saying ultimately the wealthy never like Monty Willard says, the wealthy never pay inheritance taxes anyway. I mean, I know there's a lot to think about here with this, but I mean, it's kind of interesting just because I've never heard anybody make the argument you just made. Usually the argument is, well, we can tax it as much as we want because you're not entitled to it anyway. It's always about like inequality or unfairness, but what I at least find interesting about your point of view here is that you're saying, look, I don't think the tax is just, I just think it's less unjust, which is that's a take I am always interested in to hear more about. Okay, well, I'll have to think about that. I know that, I know there's some, Monty's mentioning the practical side of it. You'd have to massively structure basic business entities. I get the practicality side. We're just thinking of it in terms of, and just thinking of it kind of on its basic merits here. Danny Den says, ask the caller about the land value tax. Do you have any strong feelings about the land value tax?
I'm not sure. I think it's a decent idea. I mean, the general thrust of Georgism, I think, is an interesting way to go, in ways that we can maximize freedom whilst getting rid of the aspects of the system in which there is a sort of imbalance in the starting capital, as it were. So I'm very much on the left side of the liberal spectrum in that sense. However, I do have a lot of libertarian sort of views as well about making sure that everyone's as free as possible. So I'm on board with the thrust of that, and that's why like thinking in terms of inheritance tax as well, something that will limit the amount that people have as a sort of starting point, and letting people earn in their own way and giving them as much freedom to earn as much capital throughout their life as possible. So I think that when it comes to land, that's a similar kind of thing. If you own the land, then you can use that land as a resource to extort from others, rather than doing labor yourself. I know this sounds a bit Marxist, but
no, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. You're not saying kill them. You're not saying kill the landlords; they're all crooks or whatever. But I get what you're saying. That there's a sort of extractive nature to, as it were, rent, right? So I get that. Okay. Well, you give me some stuff to think about here, Liberaven. So I'm glad I got your call. Thanks for pinging me in the Discord. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thanks for having me in.
Yeah. Thanks for the chat. I'll have to think about it some more. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I could ever be on with 100% or something, but that is interesting. Okay. Well, thanks for the chat, and we'll talk again. I gotta say that I think that was best, folks. I think that was probably one of the best discussions on tax we've ever had here. I mean, I don't know that I'm sold on it, but it was a good discussion.